Okay.
You've got your plasma TV, got it hooked up right into your IV. You're buying everything that's selling to you. Come to find out, nothing that they say is true. Miranda never made it to the place called autonomous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Don't really matter anyway. With the state the world is in today, and we're living on borrowed time, living on borrowed time, living on borrowed time. I read all about your disease, change your blood, stick it in the deep freeze. You believe everything that you see. Tell me where to get your lobotomy. Did you read about the tortoise and the hippopotamus? Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, 'cause I wanna be anonymous. Don't really matter anyway. Hey, yeah. State that the world is in today. Hey, we're living on borrowed time. Living on borrowed time. Living on borrowed time. Take it.
And I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Yes. And this is all you really need to know.
Okay, folks. That one didn't work. I tried. Boy, did I try. But it wasn't working with me. Sorry about that. I had a really great clip for you regarding a podcast that President Trump did this morning. Unfortunately, the sound wouldn't work, and I didn't have time to figure it out. So, I'm just going to move on. He said this morning, if you want to see what the Democrats are doing, look at what they did last night in New York City. And I will submit, it wasn't just New York City, but nevertheless, he did say, we'll see what they're doing in New York City. So, of course, he's always said, we'll never be a socialist nation. This morning he said, I always said we'd never be a socialist nation. He actually tweeted out, or truthed out, we will never, he did it both tweet and truth. We will never be a socialist or communist nation. Obviously now New York City is communist. And I submit so is New Jersey and Virginia, which will be the shadow brokers for New York City and DC. And he said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So keep your hopes up, because it reminds me of the roadmap where our next steps are literally our next steps are taking this all down. So let's keep it in our prayers, because it is an amazing time that we're in. And what I've been trying to do is show everybody how our time here has been to not just bring you forward and understanding what's been going on, but maybe understand what you're about to be watching, because I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. What we're going to be watching moving forward is going to be amazing. At least if Q is real, it's going to be amazing. How's that? So let me get started with what I've got for today. I don't know how many of you saw the preview, or if you, even if the audio worked real well. I realized when Sean tried to play it the other day that the audio was real low. So I'm going to try it again today to see if anybody hears it any better. I don't know. You're going to have to let me know. But I wanted to really get into today. This was supposed to be last week, but I woke up with laryngitis, so I wasn't able to do the show. So today we're going to do last week's show, and I have to tell you, it's pretty timely that we're doing it today because of what happened last night. What we're going to do is go through as many of the decodes as I possibly can. I don't know that we'll get through them all. We'll just keep, pile it into the next show. To be very honest, we get as many as we can in. But I think once you start seeing how the decodes unfold, you'll see that the research I've done and have been presenting really lends itself to historical times around the world, and of course the three sides of the triangle. So today we are going to focus on these decodes. We're going to really take a look at how radical socialism infiltrated the church. And it started, believe it or not, back in about the 90s. But it really went off the rails starting in about 2003 with George Soros. George Soros is the kind of person we've all come to love to hate. But George Soros himself found out something in 2000. They found out a thing called a values voter. And as a result of that values voter, he committed his fortune to taking down the Catholic vote, to distorting the Catholic vote. And I'm going to show you here in the very beginning how he did that. And for those of you that haven't seen it, I uploaded the video called Obama's Counterfeit Catholics. That is on my Rumble channel. I highly encourage you to listen to that, because now that we can set aside the whole Catholic moniker, you can now see how they've distorted. They not only went through the Catholic Church to try to capture that 20% vote, but they also went into education to build a coalition moving forward so that they could implement their full communist agenda, which, by the way, goes back to 1958, which I showed on the show Feisty Digs on Monday. So we're going to go through these posts. We're going to talk about the radical element within the church. We're going to talk about how they legally used our tax laws, both with 527, 501c3, 501c4. You're going to see how all of that came together and what they did to flip the vote. It didn't work in 2004, but by 2008, it was A-OK, and we got Obama in. Of course, running a really weak president, a GOP candidate in McCain didn't help. It will help them, not us. And then we're going to go through, I hope what I've presented over the last few shows is the reality that something was going on within the church. And if it weren't for Vigano's voice, probably most people wouldn't even know about it. So coupled with the Q posts, Vigano's voice, and a little bit of traveling across the keyboard, you get to see that there's another story going on there. And you begin to wonder, or at least I hope you began to wonder, I know I did, what role could the Pope have played in all of this? And I hopefully presented some of those questions in a way that you were able to actually think about them. And then we're, like I said, we all through this presentation, and I'll get through as many as I can in 2 hours, but all through this presentation, there are Q posts. And I'm going to ask you a question. First, put your bios on the shelf, but what do you think the genesis is of all the anti-Francis sentiment? And is there something else going on? And are we even capable of looking at the church objectively? Because I think that's a key question to ask as we move forward, especially given everything that's been going on and is going on. So, let's ask that question. And I would beg you, please put your comments in as we go, because the delay, I am watching them. I got my screenshot up. I can see the comments as they come in, but I would really like to see this. That all said, thank you so much for continuing to come to my channel. Please hit the thumbs up. Please share it. You guys have been amazing for, I think I got around 800 followers now, a little over 800 followers, and I'm consistently getting in the 2,000 and 3,000 views. And I really appreciate all your support for doing that. It means a lot. It really means a lot. It says that maybe now is the time for the Vatican research to come out. Maybe is the time for people to sit down and question, okay, is there more to the story that I wasn't aware of? So let's get started. When you look at the Vatican in context with everything else that's going on in the Q posts, you can't forget, or you have to look at them in context with the other posts, because they're all connected. And I'm showing an example here with post 134, and we know that one side of the triangle collapsed before the election. And a lot of people think that that was the Rockefeller Foundation. Actually, he died in 2017 after Trump came into office. But that isn't a bad thought, because what ended up happening right after that was that Soros moved $18 billion into his own nonprofits so that he can continue to fund what was going on. Before that, he wasn't using his own money. Between USAID and the Rockefeller Foundation, the bulk of the cost of everything that was going on was coming out of those groups. He literally did not have his fingers personally into some of these pots. Although we could see where he was funding other things, some radical stuff, he kept the real agenda as hidden as possible. So it is important to see this, because Q mentions in post 1951 that that everything is contingent on what happens moving forward. And somebody had just recognized that that the early drops mentioning Godfather 3 really talked to the Vatican, which it does. Godfather 3, what is that video about? He was cleaning money up. And of course, he just happened to know the future Pope. So, you know, obviously the corruption of the church was underway. But the truth about all of this needs to be told. And hopefully I'm going to show you where that comes from, because things are changing, where the Rockefellers supported prohibition, ultimately changing our gas-powered vehicle, our ethanol-powered vehicles to a flex fuel so that we could use gasoline, getting involved in big pharma. Now you've got Bill Gates is one of the largest farmers in the United States. So we see that the Rockefeller dominance was seemingly over, and they're trying to play catch up. So hopefully this makes a little more sense. But what we're going to find out, because of the importance of post 134, it's obviously a marker. And he tells us to learn to read the map, and the news will unlock the map. Well, we've had some news unlock this map, and it's showing how all three sides of the triangle are definitely connected. So let's start with this. I loaded this video to my Rumble this morning. It is called Obama's Counterfeit Catholics. I have damn near begged people to watch this video for years. It came out in 2010. June of 2010. It's actually a part of a series of a bunch of videos. Unfortunately, Real Catholic TV no longer features Michael Voorhees from Militant Church, because Michael Voorhees is no longer in business. I haven't checked. I don't know if you can still purchase the other videos, but the only one that you can still see is called Obama's Counterfeit Catholics. And I relied on that heavily back in the early 2010s because I could see things building thanks to the work that Michael Voorhees did. This particular video, Obama's Counterfeit Catholics, is over 600 hours of research, and he details the Soros network through it. Again, like I said, I would really appreciate it, because it helps answer a lot of questions. If you would take the time to watch it, it's about an hour and a half long. So one of the Q posts we got was the Al Smith dinner where Trump is, sharing barbs against Hillary Clinton. And he particularly, Q Post really particularly talked about these three particular clips. So I'm going to play them.
I wasn't really sure.
I don't see why it's so low.
Here tonight because I guess
Hopefully you can hear it.
Invitation by email, or maybe you did, and she just found out about it through the wonder of WikiLeaks. We've learned so much from WikiLeaks. For example, Hillary believes that it's vital to deceive the people by having one public policy and a totally different policy in private. That's okay. I don't know who they're angry at, Hillary, you're right. For example, here she is tonight in public pretending not to hate Catholics.
Democrats can't stand Catholics.
Some of you haven't noticed. Hillary isn't laughing as much as the rest of us. That's because she knows the jokes. And all of the jokes were given to her in advance of the dinner by Donna Brazil, which is, everyone knows, of course, Hillary's belief that it takes a village, which only makes sense, after all, in places like Haiti, where she's taken a number of them.
So, as you can see in this one, there's three pieces that Q wanted to key in on. The deception, that the Democrats needed deception to get the vote in their favor, because actually the country started to move right after the Obama years. So they needed the deception. But the Democrats can't stand the Catholics, and I'm going to prove that to you here in a minute. And as well, they're the fact that they're taking over these communities, like he said, Haiti, taking over these communities around the world. Today, Trump said, look at what's happening in South Africa. Look at what's happening in South America. Look at what's happening around the world. And they tried to do it here last night. Don't worry, we'll take care of it, he says. So I don't know how much more clearly you can get than that. I'm going to try to add this slide here in a minute. But when you get to a point where the deception is to the point where everybody can now see it, I think that's sometimes you can't tell them, you must show them moment, right? And just in case people are wondering, I know they keep saying that 11.3 and 11.4 are part of the Law of War Manual, which, as you know, many of you know, I disagree with. Yesterday just happened to be 11.4. Just going to point that out. And then Trump had some interesting things to say this morning. So here is the beginning of what they did. Let me tell the story. You can look at the slide if you like, but let me tell the story. So in 2000, they expected Gore to win. In fact, all the polls, just like in 2016, had Gore sweeping, the Electoral College. But that didn't happen. And we had the infamous hanging chads in Florida. After everything settled down, the Supreme Court got involved, and they finally said, no, you've got to vote, you got to register it. They turned around and they decided to do a study. In that study, they found this unique voter, at least for the Democrats, it was unique. It totally slipped their mind. They had been in their echo chamber so long, it didn't occur to them to look into what kind of person would be against their agenda. And as a result, they came up with this thing called a values voter. And people were voting based on their moral and godly principles. And this is when George Soros kicked it in. In order to, and about 40% of Catholics vote Democrat, about 40% vote Republican. There's this 20% group that Republicans have always tried to court. Democrats always took it, for granted. But this 20% core group then became a problem. One of the biggest reasons why is by the 2000 election cycles, Catholics were getting more educated. They were getting degrees. and getting more informed. Things weren't looking right, and they started looking into things. So that crucial 20% started to become a problem. So they looked into, what do we need to do? One of the things they did is they perverted what the church calls the doctrine of common good. And so I want to go through this a little bit. To be fully Catholic, you have to be aligned with the church. It's by design, you have to be aligned with the Bishop of Rome. I know this is really something that a lot of people have a problem with, but hopefully that's getting better for the voice. I'm trying to figure out. I got it all the way up, guys. Sorry, but if you're aligned with the church, then obviously what the church is teaching is sacrosanct. Come down through that process, and the doctrine of common good is what got perverted, so that the Catholic vote by and large stopped being aligned with the church on things like abortion, things like gay rights, gay marriage, ordination of women priests, such like that, communion for those that support abortion, communion for divorced and separated. These became hot button issues for the American Catholic. And as a result of that, you have to look deeper. What is the doctrine of common good? Well, there's 3 principles to that. The first one is it's respect for the person, not the society. It's not about what's good for most is good for all. This is about the individual person. What's good for you, what's good for me, what's good for your neighbor. Collectively, that becomes the doctrine of common good, and it's easy to pervert that. The church has had strong teachings. In fact, this particular doctrine goes back to 1871, just so you know. But the whole purpose of it was that it was to show public authorities and the society at large that we have a responsibility to the individual. This gets really into what the Pope has been saying lately about migration, and you'll see why I'm saying it's taken it out of context. But it also speaks to public authorities that they're bound to respect the foundational and inalienable rights of the individual human. The person has dignity. So if you understand that, then where the narrative started to slip into what's good for most is good for all, the Democrat solution, which is mob rule, then you can start to see where we're slipping on that principle. And then you've got the social well-being and development of the group itself. So it's the epitome of everything, is that it's the function of your public authorities to arbitrate and in the name of the common good to make sure that everybody has food, clothing, shelter, that they're safe in their homes and such like that. And then finally, you've got the third part of it is the requires peace, which is the primary function of government. And it's, all stable societies are founded on the principle of peace and a commitment to avoiding war and strife. It's a necessary component in the doctrine of common good. So what's the government? They have a specific role, a specific duty to harmonize all these different interests and use a justice with, interest with justice, and somehow create laws and institutions that promote not just public, but private well-being, which is where our system started to go off the rails. If you go back to 2015, with the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, it wasn't a doctrine that the American people wanted. It wasn't a doctrine that they agreed with, but we were chastised by Justice Kennedy because there were those among us that should be given that kind of respect and dignity, and it required that we give up some of our own dignity. So how does this differ? When you have a purely individualistic view of society by emphasizing the interconnectedness of the people, then you have a collective that flourishes. And it's distinct from an aggregate good, the simple sum of an individual goods, because it understands that the sum of the community is something more than just the sum of its parts. And if you go to this is CCC, stands for the Catholic Catechism of the Church. It's our doctrine. You will see in each of these parts, they actually expound on that. There are several papal encyclicals that support what's been said. And the first one is Pope Leo the 13th's Rerum Novarum, which is the whole idea of the foundational teachings of the Church, which Pope John Paul II, Saint Pope John Paul II, has reiterated in his own writings. So we can see that the Church has tried to be a voice. Something was disrupting it, and that's why I wanted to get into this today. Like I said, the Church itself has been taken out of context, and there is this Leviathan that nobody is aware of. Let me see if this will play. Please let me know if the sound is okay.
And they are an outcropping of an antichrist movement to establish a new global order. What the term antichrist refers to is an effort on a grand scale to advance an agenda diametrically opposed to Christ and his Catholic Church. These people, these groups, are not authentically Catholic because their leaders reject dogmatic Catholic Church teaching and are willfully cooperating with evil.
They know in order for this worldview to happen, the domino that needs to fall is the United States. In order for the United States to fall,
You have to get the Catholic vote because you have to get control of the White House.
20% of the Catholics that can swing one way or the other, and that's why they're so important, because they can determine the outcome of an election.
in order to get control of the Catholic vote, you have to twist and deceive and lie and cheat enough Catholics so that you have offset the good ones and the vote tips to them and all dominoes start to fall.
Now, apparently, some of this 20% swung on over to the blue side of the ledger. They voted for Obama in 2008, and apparent shift from 2004.
And this twisted theology is what that network needed to secure its victory in 2008.
Yes, I know the video was low. I will re-record everything to see if I can make it louder. But what he's telling you about is they figured out that they needed to get the Catholic vote in order to get the White House. Nobody gets the White House without the Catholic vote. And traditionally, Catholics have been Democrat voters, but they had been moving away from the Democrat Party. And they found that in 2000 when Catholics did not get Gore the White House. And that's where the values voter came in. They did not align with the Democrat plank by 2000. So because Catholics were moving away from the Democrat Party, then they had to come up with a solution to fix that. And in so doing, then the goal was to get back that crucial 20% of Catholics that they had lost by the year 2000. So this is where we're at. This is where we start today with, is an understanding what exactly happened in taking back or taking, corrupting the Catholic vote. I'm going to start with a few things. Context matters. This is Pope Francis's formally approved allowing priests to bless same-sex couples. You see that's Disclosed TV. Hopefully by now most of you realize that they do very much enjoy playing with words. The doctrinal declaration opens possibility of blessing couples in irregular situations. The actual document that was written by Pope Francis does not ever bless couples. It blesses an individual, which we've always done, but it does not bless an irregular marital situation. So the couple is never blessed. We bless the person, not the sin. But this went viral just last year, 2 years ago, went viral, and a lot of people said, that's it, I'm done with the church. So there's one. Here's another one. Commie Pope. This is Gateway Pundit. says taxation is an important tool for wealth redistribution. Well, you know, taxation that is just is in service of the common good. And that's what the Pope said. Just taxation, not arbitrary taxation. But if you go back and read what he actually said, which is right here, together with the peace that rehabilitates, where did he put it? He said that a just taxation is not communism. But of course, even the Gateway pundit took it out of context on this one. So again, we're facing a situation where it's very easy to take the Pope or Catholic teaching out of context now. Now, mind you, we're, 20 years from the time where they really started the effort to pervert the Catholic teaching. So, if you look at everything that's going on, you've got to question first, whenever they mention the Vatican, would he have said something different? And for a lot of people, they don't know where to look, don't know how to look, whatever. Here's another one. Now, I didn't put in the whole Q post, but this is a Q post that puts a bunch of pictures together that look to be that the Pope is satanic. Okay, here's what's really interesting, and this is a really interesting decode, because here we have Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, is giving the Pope a crucifix with a sickle that was supposedly carved by a Jesuit priest down there who was under captivity by the government when they were bringing in their own socialism. And the Evo Morales gives this to the Pope, and the Pope's response was, "This is not okay," while shaking his head. Of course, nobody knows the full story. What Q leaves us with is symbolism will be their downfall. Well, what's interesting, within a year, that's August 28th, 2018, by 2019, he was ousted, and a conservative who still holds office was put in place. So obviously the people of Bolivia weren't real thrilled with what Morales stood for. Again, taken out of context, right? So, like I said, they figured out these values voters, and George Soros said in 2003, prepared to use my entire wealth to unseat Bush 2. I'm gonna laugh, because unseating Bush 2 meant that he wasn't their favorite person. It's amazing how quickly we flip our allegiances ourselves and we start singing the Democrat story. But nevertheless, he wanted to unseat Bush 2. The values voters were aligned with God. They were aligned with the general principles of what Bush advocated for. You'd have to go back and look at his plank, but if you recall, he was going for even education vouchers, which you're hearing a lot about now with President Trump. So he was dedicated to unseating George Bush. This is in 2003, and he held, love the date, on July 17th, 2023. He holds a meeting in his Southampton home where he got all these strategists together so that they could decide how they're going to move forward. Okay. And right after this meeting, he moves some a $5 million donation into their little system. And immediately we have Americans Coming Together, ACT. Just so you know, ACT Blue is their fundraising arm. Already tells you where you're going, right? And then there were two alliances that were started right after that. You got Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good. There you go. There's the beginning of perverting the common good, the doctrine of common good. And then you got Catholics United, again, becoming the body of knowledge that most Catholics in this country started using, and their sole purpose was to pervert Catholic teaching. This is, I'm going to say it out loud, this is the Antichrist. What is the Antichrist? You're not aligned with the church, right? You're not following the principles of Christ, and they're not. So here we are with two organizations that came out, and the two individuals, Chris Corzine and Alexa Kelly, actually shared the same office. Shane, but on one payroll, all of that, but they came across as two different groups. That group began to bring in their version of what was the Catholic social teaching. They began to make it public. How do you do that? Well, you start by, if you look down here at the bottom, CNA and Catholic News Service, you start by forming your own news service. So you've got your think tanks with Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good and Catholics United, all under the umbrella of ACT, and you form your think tanks, CNA and Catholic News Service. These are just examples. As you can see, I ran out of space. But then you start quoting each other, and it becomes the conventional body of knowledge. And one of the individuals, that the person who became president of CAG, Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, is Tom Perriello. He was the representative from Virginia, Democrat. He's finally out of office, but as you know, last night, that didn't help us any. But nevertheless, he started running Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good. As the first president, he was really at the forefront of founding a lot of left of center religious organizations like Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, Catholics United, Faith in Public Life, Faithful America. These all became think tanks that were perpetuated through their controlled media. So here we have this effort beginning in 2003 to unseat George Bush. Obviously, that didn't work in 2004, but it did push the envelope. And as you know, by 2008, it actually worked. So I'm looking up, and these are generally, most people know these groups. You got the National Catholic Register, which is, by the way, now owned by EWTN. You got CNA, which I showed you is it's a phony Catholic periodical. Religion News Service, Catholic World News. You've got the educational piece with the universities with Nova Et Vetera. You got the Old and New Testament abstracts that are at Catholic University of America. These are the scholarly papers that they use to draw their think tank views from. And then you remember, most universities have a very heavy presence in training up our lawyers, who are quite radical. And of course, these groups aren't excluded. You've got Canon Law 101 taught at Catholic University, which also has liberal lawyers. So you can see where all these groups come in. You've got news outlets, magazines, book publishers, which we publish our own stuff, right? You've got academic theological journals and diocesan and local newspapers. So looking at that, it's like, well, where do I go? What do I use? Which is why I bring this in. In order to, and I took this straight out of, it's a screenshot straight out of Obama's Counterfeit Catholics. In order to pervert the doctrine, you have to pervert church teaching. And what they did is they started with Cardinal Bernardin's speech from 1983. And even though, and he tried to explain it, and he is a liberal bishop, but where it went was not what he was saying. And he actually explained it. He put out a seamless garment document 2.0 a few years later, but it was too late. They used this, they perverted the doctrine of the common good. And then you got two USCCB papers. Notice the dates, 2003, 2007. Notice this date, 1983. What happens the next year is a general election. So you've got Faith, Citizenship, A Catholic Call to Political Responsibility from 2003, and Informing Consistencies for Faithful Citizenship, 2007, both election years. So here we go, here again with using liberalized and I don't want to use the word corrupt, but I don't know another word to use. Sorry. So again, if you're going to take Catholic teaching and pervert it, you're now not aligned with Christ. That is the definition of the Antichrist. It's not the Catholic Church. It's the organizations that leveraged it. Wanted to point this out too, because it is true that the election machines played a big role. By 2008, we were moving away from, because of the inconsistencies in voter count, moving away from machines that actually counted the vote, where you actually voted on the machine. And almost 90% of the voters then they were voting on machines that were using direct recording equipment. So you were using scanners. From November 2000 to November 2008, the number of countries using optical scan equipment increased from 1,275 to 1,836. That's pretty big. And while the number of counties using electronic equipment increased from 320 to 1,068, counties using hand-counted paper ballots actually declined. So like I was saying, in part of what Soros did is he invested in some of these electronic machine companies, and the hanging chads from 2000 became impetus, right? The company that was responsible for sending the paper to Florida that created the hanging chads was an electronic election machine company. So they obviously had a two-prong here, is that where they couldn't get that Catholic vote, they were going to use any means necessary to capture the votes they needed. Howard Dean really focused on other things too. He made a comment, and remember, he ran for office in infamous screaming, but he made a comment at a convention where he basically said, we're not against abortion. We're not against, trying to change the words. What he said was, we're for equality. And so what he was telling the party was to change your language, confuse the language, confuse the principle. And this started to show up also with the machines. One of the things that was really interesting about the 2016 Al Smith dinner was, I sat and watched it again just the other day. And one of the things I found that was really interesting was that through the entire dinner, Cardinal Doyle only talked to Hillary Clinton. In fact, they were locked head to head through the whole dinner, almost through the whole thing, and not once did he turn around, maybe a little bit, but not once did he turn around and talk to President Trump or Melania Trump, which I found interesting. It was noticeable to me that Donald J. Trump wasn't a welcomed participant at that dinner. For a group that is supposed to be about the children, for a group that's supposed to be about the welfare, not just the poor, but the needy, the special needs, their whole purpose, that's a fundraiser dinner for the children, aligning with the Democrat Party because history dictated they do so. Al Smith himself was a Democrat. He lost the election, but he was well renowned for his support of and drive towards helping children. And here we are in 2016, even before that, in 2008, 2012, you got them both, you had Cardinal Egan was there. And what you find is, I think they couldn't get out from in front of themselves. I think they couldn't stop being lockstep Democrat. It's my view. It's funny, too, because this person on this slide, that's Cardinal Egan. He himself is filled with controversy. He had, he's being lauded at the dinner, seeing him yucking it up with Obama. But he mishandled a lot of abuse cases. So he rarely, if ever, reported any of the complaints to the police, despite the laws in Connecticut saying he had to do that. And he always minimized the issue. So there was a lot of issues with Cardinal Egan himself, which says that this is hypocritical. Trump says in his that, pretending not to hate Catholics. Well, what you're seeing is two people opposed to each other, but they had one goal. And that goal was not for your best interests. And I think the socialists needed a voice, and the Catholics needed an avenue to move forward. They needed to be able to put that out. So when you look at something like this, you have to step back and say to yourself, okay, this isn't the Pope. So remember the Q post. The Pope will be having a terrible May. The very next line, what does it say? Those that backed him will be pushed into the light, moving forward. It's got a carrot forward. Who is that? It's the same as any other country. That's the deep state, deep church, which Vigano has said we have a deep church. So now you're starting to see something take shape. And this is Vigano telling you we have a deep church. And yet people still looked at it differently. And I didn't finish this slide. I just realized that. But I wanted to put in here the whole idea of us being divided by religion is the oldest tactic in the book. The oldest tactic. So it should be able to get you to a point where you say, wait a minute, there's something what else do I need to know? Part of it is in knowing where to find more reliable Catholic news. So the L'Osservatore is it's a Vatican-controlled news service. In fact, the person who runs it right now is an American journalist, formerly from Fox News, by the way. But it is most of the time it is the voice of the Vatican. There are times, though, like the editor will be he will put out an opinion piece, but he will tell you it's an opinion piece. Most of the time, it's the voice of the Vatican. It's more of a quasi-official source of the Vatican. And this you can get this online. It's very easy to find, very easy to read. For those of you that have never heard of this, I've used it many times. So the next one, just like we have a place for all of our official documents, Vatican does too. And the Acta is basically our federal register and our archives for official papal documents. So we have the compilation of daily presidential documents at NARA, and you also have the Federal Register, which puts all of our policy places. At the Vatican, they have this one source. It's been around since 1909. It's everything you want to look at with regards to what's going on in the church, all of their official writings, everything the Pope deems is necessary for the official record will go in the Acta. So this is where, if you want to be sure, what did the Pope say? It's probably going to be in here. But a good source to start with is, of course, the L'Osservatore, which is probably the most reliable of all the media out there. It's the most reliable. In fact, all of the other Catholic media even will quote and link to this periodical. So here we go here. And by the way, it comes out in Italian, but on the website, this neat thing, if you can translate it to English. I do it all the time. So those, hopefully did I give you perspective that just because they say they're Catholic doesn't mean they are, and there was an agenda behind subverting the Catholic teaching, the Catholic dogma. Hopefully you see that. So I'm going to bring this back in. I am saying, and have been saying for several years, we've got 3 popes, now 4. And they've been confronting evil. I've shown you a bunch of stuff. There's a lot more to show you to prove it. But you've got a situation here where the popes are operating outside of their own governance structure. Just like Trump is operating outside of his government structure, getting around the 3-letter agencies, the popes have been doing something very similar for quite a while. Since 2008, they've been doing this, at least since 2008. So I wanted to point this out too, because so far I've seen, despite the media, and when the media already is taking Pope Leo out of context, I think it's a hint that they're not real comfortable where this man is going. So far, he's in full alignment with Pope Francis. who was in full alignment with Pope Benedict, who was in full alignment with Pope John Paul II. Just in case you didn't know, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict were very close. Pope Benedict is the one that put the Catechism of the Catholic Church online, fully indexed, easy to research. Pope Benedict left a 300-page dossier in 2 binders for Pope Francis, for his successor. Pope Francis is very well aware of that investigation. They became very close. In fact, they were on the phone frequently. A lot of documented reports about that. Every time Pope Francis traveled, Pope Benedict was on the phone with him. So this was not something unknown between the two of them. And then, of course, Pope Leo is now quoting Pope Francis. So you can see there's congruency between these popes. So what do you got to talk about? We're trying to get to a place called a new age of enlightenment. Q called it that. Trump has also used that narrative. It's a new age of enlightenment. What is that? It literally means, think about what the age of enlightenment did. It formulated societal opinion. It put all worthy thinking in the scholastic area, the people who were learned, educated. And they basically told you this is how you need to think. And what Trump has been doing, and what Q has been pointing to, is they're breaking that barrier back down because you have a brain. And we trust in humanity. And so they're restructuring the narrative where they took it away from you. Now we're trying to get it back. And as you see, you set the scene, then you define the problem. Don't they sound like Q posts? Then you rise action against that. Vote, 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 fight, fight, fight. We get to a climax, right? Isn't that a precipice? And then the falling action where everything starts to collapse. Do you see how that precipice has to happen? Do you see it? And then you have a resolution to the problems. So what did Trump say this morning? Don't worry, we'll take care of it. So here we are. How does POTUS shift the negative of the narrative? You shift focus from the problems to the solutions. Expect the narrative to shift completely now moving forward. So far, I haven't been that far off the money. Now he's going to start telling you this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to do it. One of the big decisions today sounded like the Supreme Court wasn't real keen on tariffs. We'll have to wait and see what that opinion does. I don't think they liked the fact that seemingly the president can act unilaterally on that. We'll have to see what their opinion does. But for right now, when you have a situation where sometimes you can't tell people, you have to show them, and it's in your face showing people, now you've got to come in quick with the solutions. And I think that's where we're headed. So when the new age of enlightenment, this is a product of the French Revolution, by the way, where they got rid of the monarchy through this new enlightened thinking. The enlightened thinking really started with Freemasonry in the early 1700s. They were formed in 1717. The theological thinking, or not theological, the sociological, the societal stuff, but the thinking that they have really started with the Freemasons. One of the things that keeps coming up, and which is why I added this slide, is that they use the All-Seeing Eye in the Grand Orient Mason House. And I'm going to show you on the next slide, these are not the same thing. So already we're showing you the Grand Orient from the 1700s is already trying to say that they're aligned with God, and it obviously wasn't. If you've never studied or never read about the French Revolution and the period of rage that happened right after that, you're in for some rude information, because it was probably one of the most bloody times until you get to the 20th century in human history. So let me go through this one real quick. So the Eye of Ra is not this, just so you know. The Eye of Ra, if you look, you see it's clouded. It's got these heavy eyebrows. You see down here, this is the image from Freemasonry. This is a clouded eye. The whole idea of the eye of divine providence, is that God sees everything. When you put a cloud over the eye, you're trying to hide from God. And so the Grand Lodge in London was founded in 1717, and just a few years later, in 1728, you've got the Grand Orient, and look, there's the cloud over the eye. Do you see it? Oops, go backwards. You see the cloud over the eye here? That is their symbolism. So the clouded eye is Freemasonry. The non-clouded eye, as you see here, is the divine providence eye, which is what's actually on our money. So I don't know how far you'd want me to go, but for what it's worth, there's a lot of reprogramming that needs to happen. The Protestant Reformation itself challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, and it helped create the precedent for questioning any kind of traditional dogma. So we're already, by the 1700s, generally questioning dogma. Remember, what does it mean to be fully Catholic? So the whole idea of questioning, which is a slippery slope, really started in the 1500s. But by the time we get to the 1700s, we are now becoming not questioning dogma, but we're becoming anarchists almost, because we're questioning governments, everything in general, which isn't necessarily bad unless you start to put in the militant part of it, the anarchist part of it. So I wanted to bring that up because, again, I'm going to show you this decode. I know a lot of people didn't agree with it, and hopefully now you get why I put this together. This statue is called the Resurrection. The Resurrection was built in the 70s. It was during the Cold War, and it's the depiction of Christ resurrecting from hell after a nuclear holocaust. It is in the building of the Papal Audience Hall. It's called Nervet Hall. Nervet is the guy that designed the hall. The Papal Audience Hall is designed like a serpent. Eyes, the teeth are actually supports, and the resurrection is in between the two supports, and the Pope sits right in the middle of it. I'm going to remind you, symbolism is one thing, but there's also messages for everybody else, okay? You can think this is evil. When you start to realize maybe there's something else, and Q actually puts out the post 3565 where the Pope is saying, let us pray the Lord free the victims of human trafficking. And he says, Godfather 3, it's going to be biblical. Everybody immediately said, well, that's because the church is trafficking. I'm not saying the church doesn't have elements or people within the church that are doing the trafficking, but it is not church dogma. It is not something the church has been doing. In fact, it's been very vocal against it. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that is a fact. So what is he saying here? It's going to be biblical. It gets back to this. Remember the 66 foot by 23 foot by 10 foot. 6 represents sin. Government is man's government, earthly governance system is made up of 3 parts. You got the monetary system, you got the power of government, and you've got the influence system, social influence, which is generally the churches. If 6 is man's sin, and you put a 6 on each of these points on the triangle, you get 6, 6, 6, a mark of the beast. So sin is the mark of the beast. 3 6s means the mark of the beast. It's total corruption. And I say this with confidence because people are looking at all kinds of other things, but you don't look in the mirror. We all have sin. This is saying our government system. And what were they saying back in the early 70s when they built that audience hall, when they put that statue in place? They were saying 2 sides of the triangle were already corrupted. The only thing left was our faith, our religion. And while this is purely Catholic, this was of all faith, right? So we are all the Church of God. Gates of hell will never prevail. But it was a warning and a message of hope. Look, we still can pull back from this if you hold true to God. And that is the whole point of this. So, of course, people would say, if Satanists took over the Vatican, would you notice? Somebody did notice. And there's been a lot of work to take care of what's going on there. But hopefully now you get to see why I bring this up. And I edited my 3 sides of the triangle slide because I thought it was easier to see. I like it better. I think it's prettier. Anyway, so you got man was created on day 6. Man's earthly governance system is represented by 3 parts: economic, governmental, social norms, values, and influence. Each side is subject to the weakness of man, weakness of sin. The mark of the beast, 666, represents the total influence of Satan on man through sin. Without God, man is weak and subject to the influence of sin. And this is what that whole story is telling you. All 3 sides of the triangle, all 3 sides corrupted. There's no hope. We're done. It's not all corrupted yet. It's not. We wouldn't be talking. I wouldn't be able to do this show if it was all corrupted. We're not there yet, but we're close. And it's a clarion call to remember who gave you life, who knows you by the hair on your head, and get realigned. Get yourself back to where you need to be. If it weren't for God, we would have no life. If it weren't for Christ, we were never going to have life again. So it's here that we need to focus our attention. And it's not all corrupted right now. It's getting close. We don't fix it. So Freemasonry, during the Enlightenment period, Freemasonry really worked hard to introduce a more spiritual brotherhood to the ranks and invited anyone of any profession could come into the ranks. That's in 1717. And we're asked, in whom do you put your trust? Who were you taught to trust the most? So the Masonic altar became a place of sacrifice, and that was happening in the French Revolution, as a matter of fact. Sacrifices of religion to religion, of Freemasonry, and gives a blood oath. We got rituals that are happening daily. And then you've got, with Lucifer, adds 400 years to the year. So Freemasonry really began the degradation. So I'm going to put this in a little more context. That Freemasonry part took money, but mostly was focused on governmental systems. They are not in a place yet to take over the religion. Worked hard on it with the Protestant Reformation, but we didn't get there yet. And this is why, how does POTUS shift the narrative? It's called the New Age of Enlightenment. And he said the real trade war began 30 years ago and we lost. This is a bright new age, the age of enlightenment. We don't lose anymore. So he's telling you, and this is from 2019 when he put that out, he's telling you things have changed. So I wanted to play these because, of course, Q puts out a post 1916, and it comes from 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. No one is above another. He says, man of God, ? See something, say something. Let me play these. Hopefully you can hear them well. This is where a priest in France slapped a baby who was afraid of being baptized. See? Disgusting. You're hearing a priest in France. And they start this is in 2017. I wanted to point this out too, because wait a minute. A priest was forced to retire after slapping the baby, so he was now forced to retire. In 2017, there were no consequences for this one. See how he slams the baby in there. It's a 2-year-old. And somebody's laughing. There were absolutely no consequences in 2017. In 2018, this priest got suspended. In 2019, this guy was actually defrocked after he violently baptized a baby in Russia. The baby actually was bruised badly. But he ended up being defrocked in 2019. We get to 2022. There was another one. There was a fatality in Romania in 2021. By 2022, they've actually started cutting back on total immersion for babies in baptism, and they're using a process called effusion now, where you just pour the water over the head 3 times. And the baby is a lot more comfortable and actually claps his own baptism. So again, here's a QD code that it looks on the surface to paint the church as negative. And like I said, in 2017, you've got a violent thing here where the priest slaps the baby. He ends up being this one here in Cyprus. There were no consequences for that action. This one, he's actually suspended. In 2019, he was banned for a year, and this guy here ends up being defrocked. No, this one does. And then this one here, the 2021 death, to finally where we've got, so in the period of 5 years, things are changing around the world. Change happens slowly, as you know. But for most churches now, we don't do full immersion of a baby. And it's got to be consensual of an older person. So that has changed things. Again, a Q post, unless you look into it, you're going to miss it. We also keep talking about the Pope being a Jesuit. And I'm going to be careful with what I say here, because the Jesuit order has been under attack since the period of Josephinism, way back before the French Revolution. In fact, major attack. Why? Because they tended to be your teachers. They tended to be the ones that they taught in schools, along with Dominicans, but they taught in schools, they taught in universities. And principalities have been trying to get control of that ripe mind for centuries. And the Jesuit order is who they've gone after. In fact, I can show you, and I don't have those in this deck, but where they literally burned down Jesuit colleges. And because the Pope was Jesuit, Pope Francis was Jesuit, and a lot of people see the Jesuits as the Black Pope, which is not true. They're not the Black Pope. All priests wear black cassocks, by the way. I'm just going to point that out. But the Jesuit order has been under fire because of people's misunderstanding of what the Jesuit order is. They are, like I said, teachers. And there's a perception of a liberal theology. And they believe that Pope Francis agrees with it. Liberation theology is something that's widely practiced in South America. And they believe Pope Francis agreed with it. He absolutely does not. He totally is against the perversion of Catholicism, as you see in liberation theology. And he's written about it, as a matter of fact. And he wrote about it in such a way, but it's always been taken out of context, that they now saw the Pope as progressive, which is what the St. Gallen Mafia wanted. They wanted him to be progressive. And as he started to prove he wasn't, then we got more and more anti-Pope Francis stuff that came out. Cardinal Casper started this in 2014. Cardinal Casper was a very left-leaning bishop cardinal out of Germany. Cardinal Casper gave a speech in 2014 where he talked about divorce, remarriage, and communion. It was so bad that several cardinals actually wrote a letter to the Pope, said, hey, you need to answer this. one of the things I will say, but by the time Amoris Laetitia came out, Amoris Laetitia put this into place, but by the time it came out, a lot of people were so anti-Pope by this time. I don't know that most people actually read the document, but it didn't change any doctrine. And one of the greatest examples you have as to just where any governance system is what laws did they change? What doctrine do they change? What standards of society are being changed? Amoris Laetitia did not change doctrine, but it did cause a problem. What the only thing it really talked to was the whole idea of mercy and discernment and flexibility to the local bishops on what they were choosing to do with their own. He wanted the bishops to seek solutions better suited to its culture. And mind you, they were getting ready for a synod on the family, and this was the beginning of that discussion. What didn't change, no doctrine was changed. Marriage was still considered a sacrament. No automatic exceptions at all, although a lot of people said otherwise. 4 cardinals wrote a letter to the Pope over what Cardinal Casper did. The letter was drafted while listening to what he was saying. It was a 2-hour dissertation that he gave. The letter itself, they said, we need your help. We need you to give us clarity. Pope didn't answer them. Didn't answer him at all. So finally we get to the synod, and they released, just before the synod, they released the 5, the set of what they call dubia, which is questions, the set of dubia that they had sent Pope Francis. And they said, we're concerned. We need your clarity. Finally, you get Amoris Laetitia that took that and told them, this is where I stand. So what Pope Francis did literally is he let Cardinal Casper say his piece. He got the 5 questions from the cardinals that were concerned about what Casper said. You got now the 2 sides, and out of it comes more Amoris Laetitia with a refinement and a clarity on church doctrine, which, remember, Amoris Laetitia did not change doctrine. So we've got here, this is from 1985, pedophilia problem needs tackling. A lot of people didn't even know about pedophilia in the church laity, or in the church hierarchy, until 2008 with the first grand jury report out of Pennsylvania. But they were saying there was a pedophilia problem that needed tackling. And I'm bringing this up because while the American public didn't catch this, the bishops did. And we have here Cardinal Bernardin. He himself developed a plan over a 2-year period, and it was released in 1991 to address clerical sexual abuse issues in Chicago, in Illinois, which got ignored, totally ignored. He became very much, let's just say, chastised and then completely moved aside. What's interesting is you got the Legionnaires of Christ. Legionnaires of Christ are run by a person named Father Messiel. Father Messiel was a rabid sexual abuser. Rabid. Plus he was a morphine addict. He said, when Pope John Paul II dies, I'm going to be in trouble. So in 2009, under Pope Benedict, there was an investigation ordered to the Legionnaires of Christ. And they then officially denounced Father Messiel and defrocked him. And he was then put in after 2008, there, of course, the Vatican is a part of the Interpol network. He actually ended up in front of civil courts around the world. But at least 60 children were abused under him. The report published said 33 priests in the order abused at least 175 minors. This is 2009. Another thing that came out is Pope Francis accused the sex abuse victims of slander. I don't know where the Pope was coming from. I do know he was getting bad information from his own hierarchy. But it's interesting that he accused them of slander. But then, this is sex abuse happening in Chile. Then he sends Archbishop Cicaluna down to Chile to look into this and came back with, yeah, it's real. And so Pope Francis came out with saying that the need to confront evil, determining fact from politically expedient hit jobs needed to be dealt with. And here's the letter. Here's the letter that he put out about the concerns that they had down there, and they ended up defrocking the bishop down there. He actually went down personally himself to talk to the victims. Here we are in another Q post. This is April 4th, 2018. This is August 28th, 2018. And I don't have the date. This is August 28th. This is September 11th, 2018. So you got the dates in order. April 4th, we're talking about the Vatican Bank. August 28th, we're talking about, Q says, expect many, many, many similar reports to surface from around the world. It goes a lot deeper. This is called Connected. The choice to know will be yours. That is post 1879, which is attached to 1021. When we're looking at down here, when you look at this one, he's talking about the Holy See is the universal government of the Catholic Church. He's referring to the Lateran Treaty of 1929 that made the Vatican a country, separate and distinct from Rome. It is the smallest country in the world, 100% landlocked inside the city of Rome. But he says wealth, power, sanctuary against criminal prosecution, recipe for, ... Of course, everybody read disaster. I'll show you more in a minute. He then brings in the We Are Q post on 1951. And then 2152, we've got the whole idea of Pope Francis compares the whistleblower, which is Vigano, to Satan. A lot of people immediately thought he's referring to Vigano. But that's not what he said. Nice time to find that truth out, don't you think? Let me stop for a second. Lynn and Aldrin, thank you so much for your donations. I appreciate that. So $2 from Aldrin, $5 from Lynn. What, did I miss another? I did not. Thank you so much. I appreciate your contributions and some more support for the work. So what he said, then he's repeating when he says the great accuser, that's coming out of Revelation. The Pope has used that term, devil or Satan, to describe those who engage in constant criticism of the church. And that is starting, thank you, Q. Starting in 2018, the epic sound of criticism against the Catholic Church was off the rails. So he actually said, in these times, it seems that the great accuser has loosened up and is angry with the bishops, trying to reveal the sins so that they can be seen, to scandalize the people. But the strength of the bishop, a man of prayer among the people, and who feels chosen by God against the great accuser in his prayer. So he's referring to Satan. He's not referring to the whistleblower, Vigano. He's referring to Satan allowing all these complaints to come to the surface. And I could go on to this slide, but I'm going to run out of time at 5:23. So there's a lot more to what that story is, but it doesn't help. You have the 40th statewide investigating grand jury puts out the report. It's a redacted report that the Pope never got. This is from 2008. It's a circle of secrecy, they call it. So it's talking about particular bishops and clerics within the state that are participating in sexual abuse of minors and seminarians. Just a couple of days later, this is put out, by the way, this is August 18th. This is put out This is put out just a couple of days later on August 22nd, and it's the rebuttal. And when you learn how to read it, you start to see this is definitely the rebuttal for what is coming, what the public is now talking about. So this document was likely, when you read it, as I read it, I saw it. It was cut out of a larger document, which he calls it his testimony. Remember Mueller, this is my testimony. Vigano calls this document his testimony. And you can, as you read through it, you can see there's broken pieces. So it's cut out of a larger work product that he produced for the Pope himself. Defrock, sorry, I don't know what that means. It means they're no longer a priest. Jane, it's when they're no longer, they have no permissions as a priest. So defrocked, they remove their cassock, they remove the collar, right? So they're no longer a priest. It forces them out of the ministry, yes. They no longer have the authority to practice as a priest. So immediately after those two documents came out, the grand jury report in 2018, August 2018, and Vigano's testimony came out, which I believe was purposefully leaked. Immediately the sounds of Pope Francis has to resign because, quote, he had already said that he was concerned and he thought that the accusers were committing slander. And then, of course, on September 11th, we get that he compares the whistleblower to Satan, which is what we hear in all of our media. And as you see, he's not talking about the whistleblower. He's talking about the state of complaint. So it always came down to one question. What exactly did Vigano tell Pope Francis about McCarrick in 2013? Let me give you a little bit of the background. 2011, Vigano released, I talked about this in the last show, Vigano released 3 letters as proof that he tried to bring the issues of McCarrick up to the leadership at the church. Nothing happened. Instead, it was completely ignored. So he then finally went public with them, all 3 of them. Really angered Cardinal Bertone. He got fired from his post as governor of Vatican City. Governor of Vatican City, by the way, is in charge of the Gendarmeria. Domenico Gianni, the head of the Gendarmeria at the time, worked for Vigano. So now Bertone fires him in 2011, and he gets sent to the U.S. to investigate McCarrick. For what it's worth, he didn't want to come to the U.S. He wanted to keep his job. I've shown you some of the reasons why. They were already working on the takedown of the corruption within the church with the Interpol contract, with the Egmont Financial Services contract in April 2011. But Pope Benedict went ahead and sent him, and his responsibility was to investigate McCarrick himself. As a result of that investigation, Pope Benedict put him under house arrest. When Pope Francis came in, McCarrick acted as if he wasn't under any kind of restriction and started traveling around again. In fact, the U.S. State Department called him a prolific fundraiser. Read that as blackmailer. I'm pretty sure that's where that comes from. But anyway, it becomes the watershed moment where there's no questioning that just like you've got a deep state, you've got a deep church, which is why Vigano keeps talking about it. And I just think at this point, now things are in the front of everybody, right? And think about it. Think about what happened. 2010, he's trying to get the Pope's attention, seemingly not getting his attention. 2011, he makes these letters public, and a lot of people weren't paying attention to what was going on in the church. He comes to the U.S., investigates McCarrick, goes back to the Vatican, and McCarrick now is under all kinds of investigation. He's not only under investigation, he's under a tribunal in the Vatican itself, which he was found guilty of. No civilian court in the U.S. has held McCarrick accountable. In fact, finally, in 2021, I believe it was, they said, he's too old. And they let it go. McCarrick has since passed on, but he was never held accountable in a civilian court. So remember when Q asked the question, what did he say when he asked the question of protection from indictment or something along those lines? It's a recipe for what? Well, in the Catholic Church, he was still held accountable. Civilian courts, he was not. Why wouldn't he be? I'll tell you why he wouldn't be. It's a very simple answer. Because of what he would have said about those he was fundraising for. So there you go. Coming back further, August 28th, here we say this is the Q post, the Holy See is universal government of the Catholic Church. Come down, wealth, power, sanctuary against criminal prosecution. It wasn't true for McCarrick. Real accountability began only because of the work of the journalists and victims advocates within the church, because the church, all of the investigations that were being done, like by Vigano and such, were being suppressed. So these people, the journalists and the victims advocates, started making things more public. And Vigano actually gave them the open door to start doing that. The confessional in the U.S. criminal justice system became McCarrick's sanctuary. U.S. laws became ill-equipped for the prosecution of church officials. So they said. No one's above another means if you're doing something as nasty as that, there's no such thing as ill-equipped to handle these crimes. Nevertheless, the penalty did happen within the Catholic Church, but not within the secular world. Pope Francis in February 29 put out he urged bishops to, quote, hear the cry of clerical child abuse victims as he opened a landmark Vatican summit on the prevention of sex crimes in the Catholic Church. That was opened in February of 2019. The Pope did not sit on this. He actually was putting together plans. They actually had documents that they were putting together, the framework for moving forward. And unfortunately, again, media was not going to report on this. So this is from CBS, I believe, Associated Press. McCarrick scandal prompts Pope Francis to open Vatican archives to investigators. Let me give you the backstory on this, because it's interesting that they're going to bring this out now. This is in October of 2018. They're saying because of Vigano's testimony and because of the grand jury reports that had come out in August, that now the Pope is opening up the archives. That had already happened in 2008. 2008, the Vatican entered into the Interpol network, which allowed the international law enforcement agencies to go to the Vatican to research and to look at any evidence that was being housed within the papal documents. I'm going to point out something here. When Pope Francis became Pope in 2013, he did not move into the papal apartments. He said it was too pompous, too much pomp and circumstance. He wanted something more simple. But just so you know, it's in those papal apartments that the actual papal secret archives are housed. There are two sets of archives. They're not secret, they're private, but the Vatican archives are housed in the Castle of Holy Angels. In the papal apartment, the Pope's secret archives are held. These are his own personal documents. Typically, after a Pope dies, they're kept quiet for about 25 years or something like that. He opened them up. He opened them up through, for the Interpol people. And in 2018, what this is telling you, McCarrick scandal prompts Pope Francis to open the Vatican archives to investigators. What that's telling you is that international investigators were already inside the Vatican. So Vigano versus the Vatican. The refusal of Pope Francis to deny Vigano's claims or even to comment. This became, and this book is terrible, by the way, I did read it. This became the clarion call that Pope Francis was not working for Vigano, which is not true. This is an explosive document. Everybody had to read it. It implicated many Catholic bishops and Francis himself in cover-ups of sexual crimes. People around the world, Catholics around the world, were shocked, and Pope Francis refused to come out and publicly deny these accusations, which led to the perpetuation of Pope Francis as complicit. But this is what he said, and it's important to read what he said. He's coming back from Ireland. He's asked by the media, what about Vigano's testimony? This is August 27th. It's like the day after, or the day of Vigano's release. No, 22nd. It's 5 days after Vigano released his testimony. He says, "May I ask you whether these two things are true?" said Anna Montrega of CBS News, CBS. And she was asking about the 2013 of abuse perpetuated by Cardinal McCarrick and subsequent sanctions on him. And she's asking, is it true? And he says, the Pope says this: I would prefer, even though I will respond to your question, I would prefer to speak first about this trip and then about other topics, but I will respond, the Pope says. Later on, he goes, I read the statement this morning, Vigano's statement. He said, in reference to an 11-page affidavit by Bishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former papal nuncio to the United States, which claimed the Pope knew about McCarrick's misdeeds and yet reinstated him to a position of influence within the Vatican. I read it. Oh, this is, remember I said here, this book comes out. It had become pretty much conventional knowledge that Pope Francis was doing nothing, and that he himself had some issues with not dealing with this. He said, I read it and sincerely I must tell you this. You, and all of you who are interested, read the statement carefully and come to your own conclusion. I won't say a word about this, he said. I believe that the statement speaks for itself, and you have the sufficient journalistic ability to draw your own conclusions. This is an act of trust. When some time has passed, you've come to your conclusions. I will speak, he said. But I would like your professional maturity to do this work. It will be good for you. That's good, he said. What he's saying is, I can't talk. You've heard, I'm not at liberty to discuss an ongoing investigation, right? You can't talk about what's in a case. He's telling the journalist here, I can't talk. He wasn't weak. He was gagged. And it's pretty evident. So where everybody was saying that he was making a thinly veiled barb at Vigano by calling Vigano Satan's accuser, I'm saying here that if he's silent because of an investigation, then the two statements don't match. Because if Vigano were wrong, he would have said so. What he's saying here is that there's an investigation going on, and I can't talk about it. So that puts Pope Francis and Vigano on the same sheet of music. Hopefully you see that. Do you guys see that? So I updated this slide. This is QPost 3709. And what it was about was Archbishop Luigi Ventura. He was accused of sexual molestation, and he resigned. Where the Pope normally, though, will let people stay on longer pending replacement, Pope Francis immediately accepted his resignation. As I do the update in preparing for this deck, what I find is that he was actually convicted in absentia for sexual assault by a French court. So I don't know where he is. He disappeared. But the Vatican waived his diplomatic immunity in 2019, allowing him to be questioned. None of this comes out in that document. He was a nuncio. By the way, nuncio, remember, nuncio is the Vatican's CIA. Vatican doesn't have an investigatory arm. The nuncios are a quasi-ambassador to whatever country they're in, but they also are the Vatican's investigators. So this guy was a nuncio, And he had a principal role in the investigations going on in France. So evidently, not only did he himself become a party to what was going on, but he helped cover it up. The victims were men he encountered during public diplomatic functions, including a city hall staffer, a seminarian, and other civil servants. There's a lot more that goes on to this. They argued, I'll clump this. His attorney argued that the accusations were minor and exaggerated, that he may have had behavioral problems because he had a brain tumor. Yeah. Member of my chat named Planet says, it's worms, I tell you, it's worms. There you go. In this particular post, we got Pope Francis allowing cardinals to be tried by criminal tribunals. This is from 2021 rather. And this is when and we'll get into this in the next deck. This is when all of these tribunals at the Vatican started to come to the surface. And what he did is he removed the shield of privilege, papal privilege. And all these cardinals and bishops can now be questioned by civil authorities. So and that's why I put this post in here. Those who backed him will be pushed into the light. There's a lot of people that were hoping that they could stay behind the shield of privilege. So, bishops, cardinals to lose special legal privileges under new papal decree. This actually goes back quite a while, but this was actually signed by Pope Francis March 16th, 2020. That's what I'm saying. This article is dated April 30th of 2021, but he had actually removed it March 16th of 2021. It was actually published May 1st, 2021. And this says 2020, so he wrote it in 2020. There's a lot went on between 2020 and 2021. I'm just going to point that out. Then we have Cardinal Mueller. Pope remembers the conservatives' blessed gaze. He is against God. Cardinal Mueller is a conservative cardinal from Germany, and one of the ones that questioned Amoris Laetitia and what Cardinal Casper had said. So here, I'm asking a simple question. You've got this cardinal in Germany in 2023 that is saying that the Pope is against God. In other words, he's Antichrist. Nothing happened to him. You've got Strickland, who is now removed. He has had all of his ministerial privileges revoked. He's still a bishop, but he's had his ministerial privileges revoked. And you got Vigano, who's now been excommunicated. At what point do we step back and go, okay, what's the difference between the three? I'm telling you, Mueller, being German, not a lot of people know about him. Strickland, being American, a lot of people know about him now, especially in America. Vigano, because of his role as nuncio and as popular as his Twitter account has become, and because of Q, largely, has become a favorite among Americans as well. So the connection? They're trying to keep this out of the American consciousness. That's the only thing that's left. So if you got these people that are going after the Pope, and there was quite a few that did that, then I'm going to tell you right now, the whole process that shut down Strickland and Vigano was because people started questioning, and they had to go after him. And the person that went after him, actually Cardinal Fernandez in the Vatican dicastery for the religion. So he actually did that. He's actually the person who wrote a book on orgasms. He said he wouldn't write the book now, but he did write it, and it's been out there. Very sexually explicit. Post 997. I'm looking at this post in reference to everything else going on. Pope will be having a terrible May. Those who backed him pushed into the light. I'm saying this is, again, what happened to Strickland is, again, about Fernandez. It was Fernandez who was behind removing Strickland. And then we got this one. I want to show you this video. Hopefully it plays loud enough.
Forces in the church right now don't want the truth of the gospel. They want to change. They want it ignored. They want to be rid of the truth that is gloriously not going to go away.
I don't know why it's not playing.
The removal by Pope Francis of Bishop Joseph Strickland, America's bishop, from his diocese of Tyler, Texas. Bishop Strickland is one of those bishops who believes as...
Play it here. I don't have time to play the whole thing. Come on, help me out.
Thank you. Thank you. Forces in the church right now don't want the truth of the gospel. They want to change. They want it ignored. They want to be rid of the truth that is gloriously not going to go away.
Okay, so remember when Michael Vorey said in the beginning that there's an active effort within the church. If you want to get the Catholic vote, you've got to pervert the Catholic vote. You've got to pervert the doctrine of common good. You've got to then deceive, by any means necessary, those voters so that you can get them back in your plantation so they vote Democrat. And what Strickland is saying, there are forces in the church that don't want the truth out there. And what I happen to notice, like I said the other day when I was putting together the slide, where is it? Oop, oop. Is that these incidences between Strickland and Vigano have more of an American-facing audience than they do anywhere else. And so, and then it seems like within the hierarchy of the church, the effort to shut down the truth from coming out has been in full active mode. So all we can do is see where that goes. Here is a post that was put out where Diane Montagna put out a thread that Vigano attached to, talking about Fernandez and his perversion in writing. And if you look at this post, which I don't have it on here, it's like several million views attached to her. She has 385,000 views. Is more than doubled that, tripled that actually. So then Vigano, of course, is excommunicated for schism. The dicastery declared that he was being excommunicated. They never gave a reason, which was really interesting. The decision was made. He's being excommunicated. It didn't say why. The same thing with Strickland. They're saying with Vigano's because he was out against Pope Francis. With Strickland, again, they didn't give the actual law, canon law, as to why either of these men had the problems they had. I think you all remember when Trump and Melania went to the St. Pope John Paul Memorial in D.C. We had Archbishop Wilton D. Gregory went after Trump for doing this. In fact, I remember I responded to this, where he called it baffling and reprehensible that Trump would visit the shrine. It's really interesting, the fact that all he did was go, all he did was go and reference, it was on the 100th birthday of Pope John Paul II. And all they did was go stand in front of the wreath, say a prayer, and leave. There's no presser, nothing. But he called it, Bishop Gregory called it baffling and reprehensible. that he would go there. Mind you, this is in 2020. This is while the Antifa and Black Lives Matter were running unfettered around our country, burning down churches and houses and buildings. So this particular post is interesting for me because it's again a reminder: have faith in humanity, have faith in yourself, have faith in God, and it's the Great Awakening telling us that this will pass. So here is a couple of posts, and it's Vigano. It's actually two posts by Q. He put it into two. Vigano wrote a letter to Donald Trump in June of 2020. It was Holy Trinity Sunday, and he's solve et coagula, meaning dissolve and coagulate, is a principle that symbolizes a transformation and personal growth. And he's basically saying we will transform, there will be personal growth. I'm just going to point out a couple of his paragraphs. In recent months, we have been witnessing the formation of two opposing sides that I would like to call biblical: children of light and the children of darkness. Children of light constitute the most conspicuous part of humanity, while the children of darkness represent an absolute minority. These two sides, which have a biblical nature, follow the clear separation between the offspring of the women and the offspring of the serpent. On the one hand, there are those who, although they have 1,000 defects and weaknesses, are motivated by the desire to do good, to be honest, to raise a family, to engage in work, or to give prosperity to their homeland, to help the needy, and in obedience to the law of God to merit the kingdom of heaven. On the other hand, there are those who serve themselves, who do not hold any moral principles, who want to demolish the family and the nation, exploit workers to make themselves unduly wealthy, foment internal divisions and wars, and accumulate power and money. Obviously, now you're starting to see why it's only in America that we know about these priests getting severe treatment. We will also discover that the riots in these days were provoked by those who, seeing that the virus is inevitably fading and that the social alarm of the pandemic is waning, necessarily have had to provide civil disturbances because they would be followed by repression, which, although legitimate, could be condemned as an unjustifiable aggression against the population. Okay, let me take you back. In April of 2020, Vice President Pence sent a letter to all the health agencies across the states. All 50 states got this letter telling them to start sending their COVID data to the task force. Instead of to the CDC, they were to send this COVID data to the task force. It started to come in. The riots in 2020 began May 25th. June 2020, the CDC quietly reduced their numbers. We were all distracted with the riots. CDC is reducing their numbers as to those who were dying from COVID. So you can see this is what Vigano is trying to point out here, is that these riots are organized, they're planned, and they're a tool of those that hate this country and hate God. He also says social order so as to build a world without freedom. And then he says, we will transform. And he uses the Masonic adages here. He also goes on to say, for this reason, I believe that the attack to which you were subjected to after your visit to the National Shrine of St. John Paul II, is part of the orchestrated media narrative which seeks not to fight racism and bring social order, but to aggravate dispositions, not to bring justice, but to legitimize violence and crime. We know is true. And to serve the truth, but to favor one political faction. And it is disconcerting. There are bishops, such as those whom I recently denounced, who by their words prove that they are aligned with the opposing side. Of course, is talking about Cardinal Gregory. So I put in here in this slide God's chat with the devil, the vision of Pope Leo XIII. Remember, the devil said, I will have your church. God said, you'll never have the church. Christ said to Peter, You are my rock. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will never prevail. This is that time where we have to have faith in humanity. To not have faith in humanity means to give in to Satan. And I think we can do better. Vatican, Pope Francis lifted the statute of limitations on the Rupnik case. This was exciting for me a couple weeks ago, because even though I had it from October of 2023, again, this is an interesting situation because this is a sister who is a part of the Loyola community since 1994. She stays at the monastery at Braga in northern Portugal, and she there was an investigation into her leadership of the religious community, and it really seems interesting to me that the nuns that complained got disciplined, but this priest did not. And this is Father Rupnik. He did not get punished. And for over 2 years, nothing happened, even though they lifted the statute of limitations on his case at the Vatican. Nothing happened. It wasn't until just a couple weeks ago, a week and a half ago, that Pope Leo lifted the veil on this one, and they finally put out that they're appointing 5 judges to review this case. Does it really take a lot to figure out that we've got people in the Vatican, this is 2023, who are leveraging a pope whose health is failing and going back to their old ways, and they were giving Father Rupnik a pass. He censored the nuns. Pope Leo comes in and says, oh, no, get it going again. And who's the common theme here? Hernandez again, because of his role. So he is the person that seemingly is withholding information to get the Rupnik case reviewed. Pope Leo seems to have picked up that mantle and is continuing it forward. So here again, another example of congruency between the popes, from Francis to Leo. And I'm going to end it on this next slide. But here we have him excommunicated for schism in 2024, July of 24. Of course, Pope Francis dies in 2025. Obviously, we have a cardinal. Those that supported him will be pushed into the light. That is leveraging his own position to keep some things out of the public's eye. So with that is so far today. It's 5:57. What do you guys think? I know the videos were low sounding, but what do you guys think of what you've seen so far? Is this following in line with what you expected? Did anything change? Did your needle move? I'd love to hear what you think of what I'm showing you. And there's so much more, by the way. This is 34, 3. I just went through about 60 slides. Looking forward to your comments. Holding on. Any more comments? Nobody? Or is it still the feed? And see, this is the hard part, right? The hard part of all of this. I don't know where we stand. Again, thank you for your support. Please hit the thumbs up. Please let other people know about this work. If you liked it, others might like it. I'm glad you like it. Thank you, Ria. Anybody have any comments? I'm glad you liked it, John Henry. Thank you so much. I am very pleased that you have more understanding. I don't know how to say your name. PJ Zwernick? PJZ? Weird? I can't say your name. And I'm going to make a mess out of it, so I'm not going to do any more. So generally, are you seeing what I've been seeing for years, that there is activity going on at the Vatican that is literally taking down the deep church. And the issue you've got, and I'll get more into this in the next deck because I'm running out of time, but the issue we have is as the popes age, because they like to hire older guys, right? As they age, they're not as capable of keeping up. Pope John Paul II, he had such severe health issues that the last 5 years of his papacy probably wasn't him running the papacy. Pope Benedict, they threw everything at him. They threw everything at Pope Benedict to try to stall him, to the point where he had to complete a coup. I will do that. Thank you, PJ. And as a result of him having to complete a coup, then Pope Francis comes in. He immediately begins to put in place those things that they tried to do under Pope Benedict, like the in 2011, one of the last things Vigano did was to sign a contract with Egmont Financial Services Group to audit the Vatican Bank. That audit didn't start until Pope Francis came in, and he reinitiated the contract. And I love the dates. So the original date that Vigano signed the contract was April 1st, 2011, April Fool's Day. Sorry about that, I'm coughing. Pope Francis ratifies the contract, and they start auditing the Vatican Bank starting July 4th, 2013. Yes, Christy, all churches were infiltrated. Now understand, the Catholic Church had a unique infiltration because of the ability to hide the money laundering. They just had to corrupt a few bishops and hide the money laundering. The fact that the Catholic Church is a country makes it unique. But they needed all seminaries to be corrupted, because you had to hear for decades this anti-Catholic rhetoric, which started going off the rails, guess when? By the 70s, in the 80s and 90s, all the way up till now. And, largely from your pulpit, you heard why you're not a Catholic versus why you are a Christian. That was used to bolster the anti-Catholic sentiment. That anti-Catholic sentiment had a strategic purpose. That strategic purpose was to remove God from everybody's language. If you're learning in your church how not to be Catholic, and you're starting to see things happening within your government that your church isn't talking to, right? It wasn't just Catholic bishops and priests that failed the laity. It was every minister failed the laity. Nobody was hearing about this stuff off of their pulpits. Nobody was hearing about the issues that were going on within our governments. Nobody was. So we've all been victimized regardless of your religion. I'm Catholic, in case you hadn't noticed. I'm Catholic, and I'm just telling you that there was a particular reason why they went after the Catholic Church the way they did. Number one, largest Christian religion in the world is Catholicism. You take down the Catholic Church, you take down Christianity. Simple, period, end of story. None of the other religions can stand. Why? They don't have a governance. They're smaller. They're easy to peel apart. So there's that goal. And communism needs God to be fully removed. They need the people to be completely and wholly dependent on government. Nothing else. So there's your strategy there. And then when you take that and you put it into perspective with what you're watching, obviously, by pitting us against each other, religion versus religion, we start arguing about which religion is right. We stop talking about God. So there's a strategy here. And like I said, they really needed the Catholic vote, so they bellied up, pretended they liked Catholics when in fact they didn't, so that they could get that vote to bring that Catholic vote back. Remember in 2000, we saw a decided shift of the Catholic vote going conservative, and that scared them. So they put everything they had into a machine that would bring that Catholic vote back. It didn't work in 2004, but it did work in 2008. So hopefully, guys, you've got a great story to think about here. And I would love to see your comments. Please make sure you add comments to the video. Let me know your thoughts, your comments. And if I didn't answer a question, let me know. And if I don't answer it in the comments, I will let you know that it'll be in the next show. So with that, I do hope you all have a blessed, blessed day. I am very excited to be back in the seat doing this. I'm going to try to do an extra show, hopefully later this week, so that I can get caught up on these shows, because I really think you need to see this story in its the complete complexity of the story. So with that, have a very blessed day, everybody. I'm very thankful for what you've afforded me as the opportunity to talk about what I love to research. Talk to you next time.
Whispers in the static, questions in the fire. The veil is torn and the seeker never tired. Scrolls of the ancients carved into stone. She reads between lines while the empire grows. The priesthood of medicine, prophets of law. She claws through the curtain, exposing the flaw. No map, no guide, just shadow she tracks. Every thread pulled is a world turned back. The faithful will know, though the words may be few. To the blind, every truth is a riddle untrue. Claws of reason, eyes of flame, unmasking the player in the shadow game, where the silence breaks, the hidden shake. She names the unspoken, the world away. Historians eye on the ruins of men, cycles repeating again and again. Digital soldier, a phantom, a spark, a voice through the wires ignites the dark. Voice of iron, breath of dust, piercing the empire built on rust. Keeper of the flame, she stakes her claim, illuminates the nameless, calls them by name. Through Babylon's towers, through Rome's broken gates, she carries a question that history hates. No creed, no tyrant, no mask will remain. When the Feisty-one whisper your true name. Claws of reason, eyes of flame, unmasking the players in the shadowed game, where the silence breaks, the hidden shakes. She names the unspoken,